I purchased this audio interface about 2 years ago. And let me tell you, I have a love-hate relationship with this thing, especially paying over $5,000 for this thing. It wasn't what I expected in a lot of ways. That being good both and bad. So I'm not here to just go ahead and bash this thing because I spent so much money and it's just bad. It's actually really good, but there's some things that some people might not know about it when they first get it that I think should be brought up because it's so expensive. Let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. I think there's something worth noting about any kind of software integrated hardware that we purchase. So this isn't a Matrix Studio issue specifically, but it is something worth noting in any software integrated hardware that you get, or even just software in general, I guess. Whenever you buy your hardware, make sure the software that is integrated with the computer you have is supported. I think there was a point where I didn't realize my Matrix Studio was updated, at least required a software update because my Mac had a software update. And just things started getting weird. I started getting clicks and pops, and my Stream Deck wasn't properly integrated either, so I had to update the software on that. So with this interface, just know that there's a lot of software related things that could happen. Now into the past few months, I haven't had any issues because I just started with a new studio. And I think even before that, it wasn't all that bad for about 6 months. So if you're buying a new computer with your new studio, make sure your stuff is compatible. Again, this isn't just a Matrix Studio thing, this is just anything. Okay, the actual first reason. The control software for the Matrix Studio is by far one of the worst looking user interfaces I've ever seen. Now take it with a grain of salt. I've only came from the Focusrite family all the way down from the Sapphire in the original Thunderbolt and the Scarlett, the 18i20, which I have in my studio. I didn't know what I was doing with the Sapphire at the time, but even the control software for it was a lot more intuitive, in my opinion, than what Avid is bringing up now. But if you look at it on the good side of things, holy crap is this interface flexible. You can literally route anything to anything however you want. I'm sure there's probably a way to route an input to an input. They'd probably find a way to do it. All I'm saying is that the software integrated for the monitor control software could use for improvement, or better yet, just a manual for the Dadman software because it's so complex. You get the manual on how to get it set up with the Matrix Studio or whatever interface you end up getting, and it does give you plenty of information, but there's a lot left out, and I'm gonna go more into detail on it here in a second. But needless to say, you're gonna be looking through some forums trying to figure out some things. Like for example, calibration. This Matrix Studio comes with an SPQ card, so I can have a different EQ setup with my monitor speakers in my Atmos Studio than I would in my headphones if I really wanted to. And you are limited with the amount of bands you're allowed to have throughout the whole interface, but if you're gonna need more bands than what this thing has to offer, you're probably not gonna buy it. You're probably gonna invest into some 10 grand Trenoff system that does this and that, and it doesn't have to be so complicated. But for a home studio like what I have, it's a beast. But back to what we were talking about with the manual and not knowing anything about the interface, and from someone like myself who barely knows what they're doing half the time, very specific nuances that might potentially cause issues in your calibration setup. Like if you don't have an extensive knowledge on signal path and how certain presets are routed in this specific interface, it's gonna screw you up real bad, because it did me for a little bit, and I can't believe I've been listening on this system for as long as I have with the setup I've had. In the Matrix Studio, when you go to set up your speaker outputs, it gives you the ability to create a bass management preset. You put in the frequency, you put in the type of filter you want, you're good to go. The low end of your speakers will now go to your subwoofers. That isn't the issue though. The issue is if you're working in Atmos 5.1 or anything with that 0.1 LFE channel, in that bass management calibration, it gives you the ability to add a filter for the LFE channel. In my mind, I would assume that the LFE filter would have been pre-bass management and would have taken an impact on how you're listening in the bass management. Like if I'm working in stereo, that filter that's being applied to the LFE has no impact on my stereo signal. And that's where I was wrong. Let's say you go to create this bass management profile in Dadman and you add that LFE filter. it doesn't just take a toll on anything that's related to the LFE. It is actually added on top of the base management filter, and it severely affects the transients and how accurate low information is perceived in just a stereo setup when you don't even have LFE content coming to you. Thankfully, I had a friend that helped me venture into this with some Pro Tools forums, and we figured it out pretty quickly. It didn't even take but a day to figure it out. But again, without having a manual that shows the routing path of how things are placed, the user interface shows jack squat. And I guess I'm not upset that the fact that this is weird to figure out, especially on your own without a manual explaining the signal path. It's that a home engineer like me receives this expensive interface and expects it to work exactly how it should, especially with the presets and the base management configuration. If you don't know better, you don't know if you're listening to your system accurately, even just before any kind of delay or EQ calibration. Hey, it's Future Alex here. Just wanted to point something out. Something that I totally forgot to mention was the solution for the LFE filter being applied to the base management and the conflict between the two. But in my opinion, we shouldn't be solely relying on our playback system for a backup in case something goes wrong. That's the whole reason why we mix in our DAWs and do the EQ curves and do everything that we do, like applying an LFE filter in, let's say, Pro Tools or Logic, because we're gonna go on a limb and assume that the playback doesn't have a filter or has a different filter than what we're putting on. And even on playback of like reference Atmos mixes, maybe they're applying a filter differently than my playback system. And then when you have that filter on top of the calibration filter in the LFE, then you have a whole can of worms that just takes a whole entire video to cover. Needless to say, you should probably be filtering your LFE in your DAW and not solely relying on what is your calibration system for that. In my opinion, don't put the LFE calibration filter. Base management is a must. And I think a lot of Atmos engineers nowadays aren't even using the LFE, so I don't think it really matters all that much. But in the instance of this interface, that LFE filter is already causing more issues whether or not we have LFE content. So I think it's just better to turn it off altogether. Just base management alone is sometimes good enough to satisfy some people, and you end up putting out things that are inaccurate. God, $5,000 for this thing. And I still think this interface is by far one of the best out there because of the flexibility alone. But another interface to consider, especially if you're on a budget, is the 18i20 made by Focusrite. I happen to have both the Matrix Studio and the 18i20 for totally different reasons. Now, while these interfaces are at two totally different price points, there's a reason to have both. And if you're wanting to compare a complex interface like the Matrix Studio with the 18i20 that's a little more simple, it'd be worth checking out this video. I compare the two, I give a bunch of reasonings why I like both and why I use both, so go check it out. I hope to see you in the next video.